January 25th, 1945, near Colmar, France. The clouds hung low like the ceiling of a tomb. Snow fell sideways, whipped by wind sharp enough to peel skin. And from the east, the hum of an American P-47 Thunderbolt cracked the silence. Below, nestled behind a tangle of brush and stone, a German MG-42 crew laughed. They had just cut down a dozen Americans on the road below. They were sure American air power was grounded. Fogged in. Finished. One of them lit a cigarette. "Die Yankees," he muttered, smug. "All teeth, no bite." He didn't see the silhouette above, nor the sudden black streak in the sky, and he never heard the scream of the engine until it was too late. He had no idea. The pilot had just broken orders. The moment the Thunderbolt screamed out of the clouds, the snow-covered hills of Alsace trembled. 3 days earlier, Operation Nordwind had erupted along the frozen lines of the Vosges Mountains, Hitler's final gamble in the West. The goal was brutal and simple: pierce the American defenses near Strasbourg, recapture territory lost after the Ardennes, and humiliate the U.S. 7th Army. The German 19th Army, veterans of Italy, and the Eastern Front believed this was their chance to redeem the fatherland's honor. Among them, Oberleutnant Jürgen Riedel commanded a machine gun nest guarding a key junction south of Colmar. His orders were clear: hold the bridge, deny armor, break morale. They had no tanks, no air cover, but they had discipline and firepower. Riedel's MG-42 had chewed through 3 waves of American infantry in less than 36 hours. Blood stained the drifts red. Bodies lay half buried under snow and shame. The American 254th Infantry Regiment had pulled back, demoralized and exposed. The Germans celebrated. The air was still, silent, too silent. Up above, American pilots from the 405th Fighter Group had been grounded for days due to visibility. Thick fog, sleet, and howling wind made coordinated strikes impossible. German scouts joked, "Even the Yankee Thunderbirds fear our skies now." But inside a wooden hangar at Dijon Airfield, Lieutenant William Bill Graves wasn't laughing. He stood over his Thunderbolt, its silver body streaked with grease and black tape. He was only 23. A Texas boy raised on dirt roads and oil fields. His father built fences. His mother taught Sunday school. He was supposed to fly recon only. Observe, report, return. His commanding officer had said it flatly that morning: "No one breaks altitude. Not unless you want to land in court-martial." Graves nodded. He always nodded. But something gnawed at him. In the briefing room, a young corporal had burst in, clutching a field radio. "Sir, 254th reports machine gun fire at checkpoint 32 again. They're stuck. No artillery, no tanks, just dying." Graves swallowed. Hard. He'd flown over checkpoint 32 the day before. He remembered the way the tree line curved like a rifle barrel. He'd marked a patch of earth, scorched black, exactly where the bodies now lay. But the fog had swallowed it again. And command repeated the same line: hold altitude, no strike unless confirmed, risk of blue on blue. Blue on blue, the phrase that haunted every American pilot. Back in December, a Mustang pilot had mistaken an advancing U.S. column for German armor. Friendly fire. 37 dead. No reprimand. Just silence. Now that fear hung in the air like frost. So Graves stayed in formation, obeyed orders, until he saw it, through the thinning mist on January 25th, a flash of muzzle fire, a burst, then another. And then the movement, not of retreat, but of precision, of practiced killing. The MG nest was still there, still chewing, still laughing. He could see the Americans crawling through the snow, bodies twisted, rifles frozen, helmets askew. Some tried to wave, others didn't move at all. He gripped the stick. "You've got to be kidding me." The Thunderbolt vibrated beneath him. 8 .50 caliber Brownings, loaded, full tank, perfect angle, but no permission. Command came through his headset. "Negative. Abort low pass. Do not engage. Visibility below threshold." Another voice crackled on the emergency channel. "Weak. Broken. They're all gone." Oh, God. Graves clenched his jaw. He reached for the flight map duct taped to his knee. X's and grid lines. Checkpoint 32. Still marked. Still his sector. He whispered to no one. "I saw it. That's enough." Below, Jürgen Riedel leaned back from the MG-42. He handed the belt to his assistant gunner. "Let them come again," he muttered. "We'll cut them down just the same." His men laughed, poured coffee from a tin pot over a small flame. One of them cleaned his boots. The war, they believed, was turning. Hitler would rally the East. The Allies were overstretched. Morale was cracking. And America, for all her bombs and brawn, she didn't have the stomach to bleed. Riedel exhaled a long plume of smoke into the cold. Their pilots won't fly today. Up in the clouds, Bill Graves flipped the safety off. The canopy of Graves's Thunderbolt rattled as he dipped beneath the cloud line, just enough to catch a glimpse, then banked hard to avoid being spotted. His breath fogged the mask. Sweat trickled from his temple, despite the cockpit's bitter cold. Still no orders. No authorization. Just that voice, faint on the emergency channel. Still repeating, "Please, anyone. They're still firing. We can't get to them." Back at the 254th Infantry's forward listening post, Corporal Eli Mendez huddled near a field phone, buried beneath a pile of snow-dusted canvas. The line buzzed, nothing but static and the occasional pop of small arms in the distance. He had been running triage for 2 days. No sleep. Frozen fingers. Half the squad gone. Something was wrong. Not just with the enemy, with command, with how still everything felt. He peered through broken binoculars. Across the ravine, the MG-42 nest loomed like a cave of fire. A low thudding growl echoed with each burst. It wasn't random fire. It was measured, calculated, precise. "Bastards aren't panicked," he muttered. "They're feeding that gun like it's a heartbeat." Beside him, a younger private vomited into the snow. He hadn't spoken since their platoon leader bled out that morning. And above them? Silence. No engines, no cover. Just clouds like wet concrete. Mendez knew the pattern. This wasn't a fallback. This was entrapment. They were being drawn in, held in place, ground into powder. He whispered to himself, "Where the hell are the birds?" Up in the air, Graves glanced at his altimeter. Barely 1,200 feet. He'd be court-martialed if he went any lower. His radio sputtered. P-47, grid H-14. "Do not, repeat, do not, break formation. Await strike package. Visibility below threshold." Graves stared through the mist. The trees blurred like smudges of ink across snow. He knew that shape. The half-ruined barn. The frozen road curling like a question mark. He'd been over this ground before. But something about today was different. The smoke wasn't rising. It was drifting, pulled by wind that didn't match the forecast. And then he saw it. A strobe of gunfire from the same stone bunker. No muzzle flash from the other side. No American return. This wasn't a firefight. It was a slaughter. He banked again, lower this time. The plane groaned in protest. Down below, Corporal Mendez's radio finally caught something. A faint whistle. a roar building fast. He grabbed the private's shoulder. "You hear that?" The kid looked up, eyes wide. "Is that—" Thunder. "No," Mendez breathed. "That's ours." And for the first time in days, he smiled. The roar grew louder. Not thunder, not artillery, but that distinct, chest-thumping scream of a radial engine pushed to the edge. Lieutenant Bill Graves dropped to 800 feet. He shouldn't have, but something had snapped. Below him, the pine trees parted like green thorns. A white road cut through the woods like a scar. On its shoulder, black dots, bodies, rifles, no movement. He flicked the radio. "Command, this is Graves. I have visual confirmation. Checkpoint 32 is under fire. I repeat, American casualties visible. No friendly return fire. Requesting immediate strike clearance." Silence. Then static. Then the same dry voice. "Graves, hold altitude. Do not engage. Wait for package B2. ETA, 19 minutes. 19 minutes. He stared down. They didn't have 19 seconds. Meanwhile, on the ground, the German MG Nest had just rotated. A second crew had taken position beside a frozen irrigation ditch. Their belts were fresh, their hands steady. The gun didn't sputter. It purred. Oberleutnant Jürgen Riedel knelt behind a chunk of masonry, peering through his field glasses. He saw them. A dozen Americans, barely upright, crawling through a ditch filled with slush and blood. One was dragging another by the collar. Another staggered with a field radio strapped to his back, still trying to call out. Riedel smiled grimly. "Keep feeding the gun," he barked. "No mercy now." His assistant passed him a flask. "The sky's still ours, sir. No cover, no planes. They are finished." Riedel smirked. "Yeah. Let them freeze." But his smile faltered. There it was, a shadow in the mist. A flash of silver. Low, too low. The MG gunner stopped firing. "Ist das—" Before the sentence finished, Graves's Thunderbolt broke through the fog. Like a thunder god ripping through the clouds. The German position erupted in shouting. "Flieger alarm! Runter! Schnell!" Riedel's men dove into snowbanks, but they were exposed. Wide field, no overhead cover, and a gun nest built for concealment. Not survival. Graves leveled out. A line of 50 caliber tracer fire stitched across the trees, then curved like lightning into the stone nest. The MG-42 spat once, then burst into shrapnel. Snow, fire, and chunks of torn earth exploded upward. The assistant gunner's body flipped sideways, arms limp. Riedel fell backward, dazed, half his coat torn open. He reached for his pistol, then stopped. There was no one left firing. Up above, Graves banked right, his wings catching the sunlight, just long enough to be seen from the valley below. Corporal Mendez stared in disbelief. The gun was silent. The birds had returned. Around him, the wounded stirred. Not all, but some. One reached for his rifle. Another sat up, blinking through blood. Then, over the radio, Mendez keyed his mic. "To whoever's flying that tin can, you just saved an entire platoon." Graves didn't respond. His lips were pressed tight. His breath fogged the glass. He hadn't been cleared. He hadn't been ordered. But he had done what the radio never would. He had listened. When Graves returned to altitude, his hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what he'd just done. He hadn't waited. He hadn't obeyed, but he had survived, and others had lived. Below, the forest was quiet now. Smoke curled from where the machine gun nest had been. No movement, no return fire. And in the rising calm, something else happened. Something small, unofficial, off script. On a hill near the wreckage, One of the wounded Americans stood, slowly, blood staining his sleeve, helmet tilted. He raised his hand. Not a wave, a salute. Not regulation, not necessary, just gratitude. Graves saw it, and it hit him harder than any debrief or reprimand ever could. He remembered his first briefing in England. A colonel had barked, "You are not cowboys. You are not heroes. You are assets. Follow the order. Fly the pattern. Land on time." But now, Graves wasn't thinking in patterns. He was thinking of faces. Of the private crawling through slush with a radio still clutched in his arms. Of the flash of muzzle fire and the bodies that didn't move. Of the silence that command mistook for strategy. But he now recognized as fear. On the German side, Oberleutnant Riedel leaned against a scorched pine stump. His ears rang. His left hand shook. Smoke from the blast curled around the crater where his machine gun once stood. He stared into the snow, confused. How had it happened? Where did the American plane come from? They were supposed to be grounded. That was the rumor. That was the belief. That was the illusion. But belief and reality had just collided, and reality left a crater. He pulled a crumpled leaflet from his pocket, one of the ones dropped by Allied planes weeks ago. It read, "We see you, we will strike. Even when you least expect it." He had laughed when it fell, thought it was propaganda. But now, with his men dead and the gun nest shattered, he realized something. It wasn't propaganda. It was a promise. And the Americans had just kept it. Riedel sat in the snow, dazed. His gloves were gone, one boot torn. The cold bit through him, but he didn't move. Across the scorched tree line, a strange object fluttered in the wind. He limped toward it. A piece of cloth, olive green, scorched on one edge. He picked it up. An American scarf, the kind infantrymen wrap around their necks for warmth. On its corner, someone had stitched two letters, MG. Not initials of a unit. A name, maybe. A mother. A girl. Riedel stared at the fabric. It smelled of cordite, sweat, and something else. Soap, the faint floral scent of civilian life. His hand tightened. They're human, he thought. He'd known it before, intellectually. The Geneva Convention, Red Cross parcels, rumors that American POWs weren't mistreated. But this was different. This wasn't rules. This was compassion, sewn into a scarf, dropped in battle, still warm. It reminded him of something buried deep. His sister's handkerchief, a letter his mother sent during his first winter at the front. The war had made him forget those things. But now, one piece of enemy cloth pulled it all back. On the American side, Lieutenant Graves was circling for the last time. Fuel was low. He had minutes before turning for Dijon. He glanced down again. Smoke still rose from the wrecked MG position. No return fire. No tracers. Just stillness. He'd done it, but he wasn't celebrating. He was thinking about what came next. The radio would be waiting. His commanding officer would demand a report, a reprimand, maybe worse. But somewhere in the back of his mind, another voice echoed. It wasn't from command. It wasn't even military. It was from home. His father, on a quiet porch back in Amarillo, once said, "Son, if you ever have to break the rules, make damn sure it's for someone else's life, not your pride." Graves looked at his fuel gauge, then at the distant ridge. Then he turned the Thunderbolt west, toward the base, toward whatever consequences waited. And as he pulled back into the clouds, he passed over the wreckage once more. In the crater below, Jürgen Riedel still clutched the scarf. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. He had seen enough. By the time Graves touched down at Dijon, the tarmac was slick with melting frost. His Thunderbolt wobbled slightly on landing. One wheel flared too hot. The crew chief waved him in, confused. "Did you fire?" the mechanic asked, seeing the carbon on the wings. Graves didn't answer. He climbed out, unbuckling his harness, and dropped to the ground with a grunt. The tower was already calling. His radio was blinking red. A jeep approached, fast. He knew what was coming. But back at checkpoint 32, something else was happening. The trees had gone still. The air, after so many hours of gunfire, was quiet again. Private Daniel Hartley blinked through frozen lashes. He'd been pinned for hours in a shallow trench next to a dead comrade. His leg was soaked in blood. He could barely move. He thought he was dying. He thought they all were. And then the gunfire stopped. Not paused. Stopped. Hartley didn't believe it at first. He looked up. Snow drifted gently from the branches. Corporal Mendez knelt beside him. "You still breathing, kid?" Hartley managed a whisper. "What happened?" Mendez smiled, teeth cracked and stained. "Bird came low, took out the whole nest, one pass." Hartley's eyes widened. "Who?" "No idea. Not authorized. Not expected, but—" Mendez looked toward the smoldering ruins on the ridge. "I'm guessing he broke a rule or two." A few men laughed, a dry, painful sound. Another lay on his back, muttering, "Tell me that was real. That wasn't just frostbite." Then the radio crackled. It was Graves. One sentence. Measured. Flat. "Friendly at checkpoint 32. Confirm status." Mendez grabbed the handset. "We're alive," he said. Then louder, voice breaking. "God damn it! We're alive." Over the static, Graves replied simply, "Copy." Hartley turned his head toward the sky. He didn't see the plane, just the trailing echo of its flight, a fading line between clouds. But in that moment, he felt something shift. This wasn't strategy. Wasn't a clean order from a clean office. It was a man, up there, who had looked down, seen death coming, and decided to stop it. Even if it meant ending his career. Even if no one ever knew his name. Hartley closed his eyes, and for the first time in days, slept. In the dressing room of the Dijon airfield barracks, Graves sat alone. His flight jacket lay folded across a stool. His gloves were stiff with dried sweat. The scarf around his neck, olive green, frayed at the edges. He began to untie it slowly. He paused, fingering the fabric. This scarf had been mailed from home, Christmas package from his sister back in Texas. She'd sewn his initials on the corner, WG, a little joke. "So you don't forget who you are," the letter had read. He hadn't laughed then. He did now, bitterly. Because up in that cockpit, he hadn't felt like William Graves. He hadn't felt like anything at all. Just instinct, just blur. Just smoke and noise and disbelief. He stared at the scarf again. Only now, after what he'd seen on the ground, the bodies, the blood, the fear, it didn't feel like comfort. It felt like weight. Outside the door, boots thudded. The Squadron XO stepped in. Clipboard, stern face, no emotion. "You broke protocol, Lieutenant." Graves nodded. "You dropped to 800 feet. Engaged without visual confirmation from HQ." Another nod. "You realize we could have you grounded." Graves looked up. His voice was calm. "And if I hadn't?" The officer didn't answer. Graves stood slowly, his legs stiff. "I saw a dozen Americans bleeding out. I heard their screams. I saw the muzzle flashes. That wasn't theory. That was real." He stepped forward. "So yeah, I broke altitude. I pulled the trigger, and I'd do it again. The XO didn't write anything. He just nodded once, almost imperceptibly, then turned and left. Graves stood alone again, still holding the scarf. He tied it back around his neck. Not tightly this time, but with purpose. Across the base, a field runner jogged toward the tower, waving a message sheet. It was from Forward Command. A single line from the 254th Infantry Commander. Unknown Thunderbolt saved checkpoint 32. Request pilot's name for commendation. The tower paused. No one answered. Graves stepped out into the cold. Snow still drifted. His plane, streaked and battered, waited in the hangar. He looked up, not at the sky, but at the scarf, blowing slightly in the wind. The same scarf that had warmed him before takeoff was now the only thing he carried home from that mission. Everything else, protocol, reputation, safety, had burned away in that pass. The German field hospital outside Colmar reeked of iodine, kerosene, and wet wool. Nurses moved between beds like ghosts. Outside, artillery thumped distantly. Oberleutnant Jürgen Riedel sat upright, a bandage wrapping half his rib cage. His uniform, torn and bloodied, hung on a peg beside him. He hadn't spoken in hours. The scarf, American, olive green, still damp, lay folded in his lap. A medic had found him wandering near the crater, coat unbuttoned, muttering names no one recognized. He hadn't resisted. He hadn't saluted. Now, inside this dim barrack of a hospital, he stared at the cloth like it held answers. Across the room, a Feldwebel read from a printed dispatch. Enemy air operations believed limited due to weather. No confirmed strike capacity east of Dijon. Local engagements to proceed with confidence. Riedel laughed, once. It startled the room. Confidence, he muttered. The other officer looked up. Was? Your dispatch is wrong, Riedel said, voice hoarse. There was the air cover. One Thunderbolt. Came through like a ghost. Low. Too low. Impossible. He touched his side, wincing. It wasn't just the aircraft, he added. It was the timing, the precision. They knew. The Feldwebel frowned. But Luftwaffe intercepts confirmed no. They don't need confirmation, Riedel snapped. They have instinct. He held up the scarf. They have men willing to die for each other. Not the Reich. Not slogans. Each other. The other officer said nothing. He folded the dispatch, quietly walked away. Riedel slumped back, the weight of realization crashing down like artillery. He'd spent 3 years believing German superiority was in tactics, in will, in sacrifice. But today, it wasn't a panzer that broke his unit. It wasn't a strategy, or a general, or a speech. It was one man, in one plane, disobeying orders, choosing conscience over command. The machine gun team, gone. The junction, lost. The myth, shattered. He looked around the hospital. So many young faces, so many stitched wounds. So many questions that couldn't be answered by propaganda anymore. Outside, American fighters roared faintly in the sky. Riedel looked up, and for the first time since Poland, he didn't feel proud. He felt small. 42 years later, in a small town outside Amarillo, Texas, a local radio station hosted a reunion for World veterans. Most had stories, medals, mishaps, moments of survival. But one man sat quietly near the back of the hall. His name was William Graves. He was gray now, slower, a limp in his right leg. But his voice, when he chose to speak, still carried steel. A young journalist, fresh from college, approached him with a recorder. "Sir," she said, "they say you saved a regiment outside Colmar. that you disobeyed direct orders to do it. Graves looked down at his coffee. I didn't save anyone, he said flatly. The reporter blinked. But I made a choice, he interrupted. One pilot, one pass. Maybe it helped, maybe it didn't. But I saw men dying, and I could stop it. That's all. She hesitated, then asked softly, Weren't you scared? Graves didn't answer immediately. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out something wrapped in plastic, old, frayed, olive green. The scarf. He unwrapped it, smoothed it out on the table. The initials still faintly visible. WG. This? He said. This ain't regulation. My sister made it. Sent it to me Christmas of '44. I almost didn't wear it that day. Said it would make me look like a rookie. He looked her in the eye. But it's the only thing I brought home from that war that still matters. The room around them buzzed with chatter, laughter, stories of generals and victories. But in that corner, there was only silence. Did they punish you? The journalist asked. Graves chuckled. Just once. They wrote it up, gave me hell, then tore the report up 2 days later. Said they couldn't confirm the kill. Said I might have saved a few. He paused. But I know what I saw. I saw a boy dragging another boy through snow, trying not to die. I saw a machine gun that never stopped. I saw a target so clear it burned through the fog. And I saw no one else was coming. He folded the scarf again, placed it gently back into his pocket. That's when I learned something, he said, leaning forward. You can follow every rule and still lose men. But sometimes, to win, you have to follow your gut. He stood, adjusted his coat. Just don't do it for glory, he added. Do it because somebody down there's counting on you, even if they never know your name. January 25th, 1983. Exactly 38 years to the day. The snow fell gently on the hills outside Colmar, not as it had in war, thick and choking, but soft, like memory. A rusted road wound between pine trees, half forgotten by history, flanked by brittle stones and wild branches. The earth here bore no monuments, no plaques, no parades. But one man walked alone across the ridge. William Graves. No uniform, no escort, just a scarf around his neck. Olive green, now faded nearly to gray, and in his hand a small piece of twisted metal. Aircraft shrapnel, shaped like a sliver of Thunderbolt wing. He had kept it all these years. The forest was silent. Even the birds were still. He reached a clearing, barely 10 meters wide, where the trees parted just enough to reveal a shallow dip in the earth. This was it. Checkpoint 32. He knelt, not slowly, but deliberately. Pressed the shrapnel into the frozen soil. Not with ceremony, with memory. He looked up at the sky, the same sky he'd once sliced open at 300 miles per hour. Then from his coat pocket, he pulled a photo, crumpled, worn at the corners. A letter had come 2 years ago, from a man named Daniel Hartley. A boy Graves once saw through a frosted cockpit, bleeding in the snow. He had survived, lived a quiet life, became a teacher, 3 kids, a dog. In the letter he wrote, "You didn't just break orders. You broke the chain that was dragging us under. I never saw your face, but you saw ours." Graves folded the photo, tucked it into the scarf. He stood, and for a moment, just one, he turned back. His boot prints in the snow were the only marks left. No medals, no witnesses, no official record. Just a man who once flew too low to be forgotten. And as the wind picked up, pulling at the scarf, swirling the snow, he whispered something only the trees could hear. "I didn't do it for the war." He looked down at the place where the gun nest had burned. "I did it for the boys." And with that, he turned, walked back into the woods. One footstep, then another, until he was gone. The snow covered the trail, the sky closed behind him, and the question remained, hanging in the silence. What would you have done if you were him?